Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest today is Mr. Stephen Monroe, a Florida cattleman, conservationist, and poet. Mr. Monroe is a true Florida cowman, and we'll say that he is a true Florida cracker cowman on top of that. And he could tell us stories for days and hours, and I can tell you months and years, but about his time in the saddle. Stephen grew up in North Florida working in the family cow pens and has experienced also on the farming side of agriculture as well. Accomplished as well as being well known, Mr. Stephen Monroe holds degrees and experience in agribusiness, in agricultural science, international marketing, and animal health. Mr. Monroe, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. President Smith. It is a pleasure to be here with y'all today.
Well, we sure appreciate you taking time to be here and be with us. And I tell you what, you've got a lot of accolades. So tell us a little bit about your history in North Florida and how you got to where you are and what you're doing now.
Thank you. I was born in Jefferson County, Florida in 1958. Waukeena is our hometown.
Amen.
My unexpected twin and I were born. Mama didn't know she was having twins. She had us on April the 4th, and we had an older brother that was 13 months old that day. So all of a sudden, the Monroe family grew exponentially. And back in 1958, nobody knew. There wasn't a whole team of doctors. It was just my mother and her mother and the doctor and his nurse. And then until the two of us came into the room. Daddy was in the woods cow hunting, and he'd left the house at 4 o'clock that morning to go cow hunting down in Taylor County.
How about that?
And Mama had the idea that she was close to having babies, or a baby, but Daddy had to go get those certain cattle. So they had to send word to him. They didn't have a pocket phone back then. They had to send word down to Taylor County, tell Danny Monroe to come home. That's a whole nother story I hadn't planned on telling, but it took nearly a half a day to get word to him. And the guy that showed up at the cow pen, they had the cattle at the Easter Hole cow pen. These are wild cattle, and they had them just in the crevice, right ready to approach the pen. And the guy went down all excited to tell Danny Monroe to come home. His wife was having a baby and something was going on. He jumped on the cow pen side of the cow pen and hollered, and all the cows ran back into the brush, into the flat woods. So he messed up a good day's work. So then he made his way home to find out. And the urgency was that they were twins. Nothing was wrong with us, but he made it home. We were already at home from the doctor's office by the time Daddy got home from the flat woods.
No way.
Yep.
That's neat. That's a neat story. So you got a twin brother and an older brother. Were any other born later?
Two girls born later. They spread the girls out. They had the boys in the pile, spread the girls out over the next 15 years.
Well, that's it. My mama's an identical twin as well. So yeah, born just a little bit before that. That's for sure.
They're special.
Yeah, and you and your brother are still close?
We're womb mates.
Yeah. Now, which one was born first?
They think I was. Mama thinks she knew us apart. She could always tell us apart and all that, but they wasn't keeping much clock. They said 15 minutes, but they don't really know. They were most busy tending to us, not watching the clock,
How about that?
Which is appropriate for farmers. We don't watch the clock anyway.
No, that's right. That's right. So your dad had to go back and recollect some cattle, and do some more cow hunting, and get them back to the pen.
They had to regather that group another day.
There you go.
Wrecked the whole deal.
Well, you were born in Jefferson County, and then that's where you were raised as well. Stayed there all your life.
My mother's family were in Jefferson County from the early, 1837, before Florida was a state. And they came to Florida, the Brookses and the Spratts came to Florida for the turpentine and timber industries, and they were subsistence farmers. So we've been there. That's 6 generations in Jefferson County on that side for me, and 8 for my grandchildren. My father, his family came from Taylor. His granddaddy came from Taylor County into Jefferson County in right at 1900, built a house where we lived. We lived where I grew up in 1903, and that house is still there. My father they built another house up the road. Then when he got married to Mama, he moved back in with his grandparents in the old 1903 homestead. And that's where we were raised. We all grew up in that house. And we were raised, like somebody said a while ago, raised poor, but we didn't know it. Had the best of everything. Mama kept us fed, kept us clothed. Daddy worked hard. And we idolized Daddy and his partners. The cattle industry, he was a cowboy. What kid would want anything more than their daddy to be a cowboy or a cowman, or he was the top drawer for us.
Well, how about that? And a lot of people don't realize that some of the first the first cowmen were from Florida, dating back into the 1500s, 1600s, right. Early 1600s. And it's a part of our history, and you're a real authentic cowboy. And tell us a little bit about Florida cracker cattle and the life of a cowboy in Florida. Actually, I call them cowman. I don't like cowboys, cowman. We're cowman. The cowboys are out west.
Cowboys, that's exactly right. The cowboys out west. They were mostly orphans. They worked for the owner of the cattle. Would hire the local orphan boys to go drive the cattle out west, because a lot of them didn't come home. They didn't make it home from the cattle drives, the great cattle drives that was 80 years later than Florida's cattle industry was already booming before the cattle drive era happened out west. But the people that owned their own cattle, and they worked just as hard as any cowboy. Right. They worked, but they owned them. They were typically known as cowmen. I want to back up, though. I jumped the gun, didn't tell you much about my granddaddy's family.
Sure.
From being Taylor County. His wife was my great-grandmother. She was the rural mail carrier as a teenage girl in Taylor County. She carried mail horseback like the Pony Express folks. And her parents were Hagans and Hardys, and that's the Hardy County, Florida, is named after. The governor, one of them was a governor, but they were cow people, and that's so. I count that as my cattle history, my cow heritage. The cattle in my blood comes from my great-grandmama's side of the family.
So you had to jump from Jefferson all the way down to Taylor, and then you really took a jump down to Hardee County, having a family heritage named governor and a cowman out of it. I tell you what, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
So going back to just a little bit about cracker cattle. Now, you have a history with them, especially with your family. That's what that breed was back in that time, and descendants from the Spanish cattle. Give us a little background on cracker cattle and how your family had ties to it as well.
The Florida, what's now known as the Florida cracker cattle, are descendants of the cattle that the Spaniards brought here in 1521. When the Spanish conquistadors came exploring the New World, they didn't expect there to be a Winn-Dixie or a Publix on the corner when they got here, so they brought their food stock with them. They brought cattle, sheep, chickens, pigs, and their horses for transportation. And those cattle that were allowed to live, and they got off into Florida's woods. Some of the Spanish explorers didn't make it very long in Florida, but the cattle persisted, and they continued bringing brought additional cattle. There's records of cattle being brought to Port Charlotte and to being brought to other ports in Florida during the 1500s, and those cattle thrived in the same conditions where they had come from, and it was survival of the fittest. Until the ranchers started fencing in the ranches and importing other breeds, those cattle had nearly 400 years to pick out which one's going to survive and which ones wouldn't. So the cattle are very hardy, they're very fertile, they're very self-reliant, resistant to disease and insects. So they have some genetics that are worthwhile. Commissioner Doyle Connor was Commissioner of Agriculture from 1960 until 1990. In 1965, he was talking to the Cattlemen's Association at one of their conventions, and he said, and he's talking about new stuff. He said, but let's do something to save our granddaddy's old stock. And he kept mentioning it to him. So finally, in 1970, when the Commissioner of Agriculture got 100 acres of land in Tallahassee to build an ag complex, a laboratory complex on to serve the state's agriculture, he had that space there, and some of the cattlemen found out about that land. They said, we're sending you 5 heifers and a bull calf from Okeechobee County. That started the little nucleus herd in Tallahassee. Right. And that got him fired up about wanting to do something with these cattle. And the little herd persisted. They sent some down to some more land they had in Brooksville. And by 1985, he was looking around to see what he might do to make a program out of this, not just have the cattle. So they had some foresters managing the cattle that really wasn't into the genetics and all that. And I'd met Commissioner Connor several times and showed horses with his son, Doyle Jr., and was in 4-H and all that. And Commissioner Connor knew me, and Daddy was really a good advocate for agriculture. Anytime the legislature had anything going on, a tractor brigade, driving tractor to Tallahassee, to the steps of Tallahassee, or courthouse, or the Capitol steps or whatever, Daddy was involved in all that stuff. The commissioner had legislative trail rides, and we would provide horses. We would collect up horses from all the different ranchers around us to take them to the woods in Apalachicola State Forest, to let the legislature ride around in the forest and let commissioner talk to them about ag for a weekend. Mm-hmm. And that was our advocacy back then. We didn't even have a driver's license. Daddy said, take these horses and go by Sheriff Raymond Hamlin's place in Leon County, get his daughter's horses. And we got there, not even, getting the sheriff's horses. We wasn't old enough to have a driver's license, but we getting the job done, Mm. And later on, Commissioner Connor had other trail rides. He rode from St. Augustine to Tallahassee to celebrate Florida's sesquicentennial in 1976, and we got to ride with him.
How about that?
And he rode my horse because he was tired of his old quarter horse that was really rough riding, and I had a smooth riding gaited horse. So he rode my horse the last part of it until he got right to the edge of Tallahassee. And he said, we better swap horses again. Let me get my parade horse back. But I enjoyed doing that. And by knowing the commissioner, when he got ready to do something with the program, he asked me if I would come to work for the Department of Agriculture and make a program of that. So that's how we got started doing the cracker cattle, formed the breed association and got that going.
What year was that?
In 1988. I started in 1985. And being typical Commissioner Doyle Connor, I had a full-time job besides my cracker cattle fund. So I just had to do that on extra duty. But I enjoyed every moment of it. And I worked in international marketing and kept the cracker cattle program. They wasn't even named cracker cattle then. We named them cracker cattle. They could have been called Florida's range cattle, Piney Woods cattle. Mm-hmm. But the cracker culture, the cracker lifestyle, the cracker heritage, they had buildings, cracker building structures and all. So we felt like that was the right name to put on them. But he would talk about the cattle. He would give me names of wazzy fish and other people, the basses who I knew. But people, he would say, have you talked to them yet? Or do you know them? Let's talk to them. So I started putting this name of people together that had like interest in the cattle and the horses, the Hardys and all those folks. So by 88, I had enough lists. We called a meeting, called everybody to come to Tallahassee for our first meeting, wrote the bylaws, formed both associations at the same time.
How about that?
We decided to form two associations because of the differences. Some people want to play horse, some people want to play cow. So we decided we make two associations, and it's been great.
So a lot of our listeners, they may not have any ties to agriculture in the state, or especially to ranching, but even some of ours that are growing growing produce or involved outside of the cattle industry. You mentioned the importance of some of the real unique and very desirable qualities of a cracker cow, a cracker cattle, and that they were parasitic, had some resistance to different parasites, external, internal. You also have some heat resistance, etc. But the breed is not common in the commercial industry today. Could you explain why? When
the screwworms came along, people had to start fencing their land to be able to gather cattle to treat them for screwworms and ticks. They had to eradicate the ticks. They had to dip these cattle. So they began cross-fencing in these huge pastures and gathering the cattle. That allowed the better management and better fencing and better forages allowed the cattlemen to import other breeds. They had started with the Bos Indicus cattle, which we know as American Brahman now. But they crossed the Brahman cattle with the old Florida cracker cow, and the calf, because of heterosis, it was the calf was better than either parent.
That's right.
So they gave all the credit they forgot to give credit to the little cracker cow. These Brahma bulls must be magic. Look what they've done. Look at this calf. So they bred those calves again to Brahman. And then, as I said, they started improving pasture. They could bring in a red Devon or a red Pole or a shorthorn bull or something else. So they forgot about the contribution that the little cracker cow, the maternal characteristics all that the little cracker cow had. So it just became more commonplace to use Brahma cross than it did the cracker bloodlines in the cattle. If they had used cracker bloodlines in English bulls, we'd have the same thing. You can get the same thing you get from the Brahma, the heat tolerance and disease and parasite resistance from the Brahman, you can get from the cracker cattle. But the Brahma are a little more muscular because we've selected them that way, and a little, maybe a little more meaty. So they've decided to go that route instead of having a component of Florida cracker cattle and European breeds or continental breeds like the Angus or Simmental, those other breeds that would do the same job in Florida.
So just for everybody to say, there's still a bloodline that is there that is a result of the cracker cow.
Yes. That
is very prominent in Florida cattle industry.
And a lot of the ranchers trace their roots back to those old-timey cattle.
So does the commission still have the commissioner's office, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services? Do they still have a cracker herd, and is it being maintained? And if so, how can people access it?
The department still has cracker cattle, a nucleus herd in Tallahassee, and one with Lacoochee State Forest. DEP also has cattle on the Paynes Prairie State Preserve and Lake Kissimmee River State Park. We started, because state property can only be sold at public auction, declared surplus and sold at public auction, we started having sales in 1989. The Cracker Cattle Association had a sale to provide these cattle from these state herds as well as any from the private herds. By then, there were several private owners that had some that enough to share with other folks. So we started having an annual sale, and that's how people access the state's genetics, is by going to the annual sale and buying them.
How about that? Well, that's good. That's neat. And you're still involved with that part of it too?
Yes. We've had our 34th or 5th annual sale so far.
Amazing.
This past October. It's in October every year.
In what ways do you see the role as a rancher contributed to the preservation of agriculture and its heritage? Just it's a tie back to what I asked a little bit ago, but how do you see that role still tied today?
It's not just me, President Jeb, but I'm proud of all the folks who have done so well to preserve the real part of Florida that we all love. It gives me pleasure to share the culture of agriculture with folks of all walks of life. I have promoted Florida agriculture across the U.S. and abroad, and no matter where you go, the best people on the planet are those who work with God's creation and growing something.
Amen.
Florida agriculture has come a long ways in being able to share our story with people. People are interested in learning about what we do on our farms and ranches. So hats off to the people like you, President Smith, and the fine Farm Bureau team for helping us find new ways to bridge the gaps of public awareness. People are usually pleasantly surprised to find out just how welcoming and open farmers are. We're just usually too busy, or frankly, too satisfied doing what we always do, and coaxing a crop out of the ground, or welcoming a new calf, coaxing him up to his feet. Amen. To be worried about stopping and taking time to share it with the neighbors or the public or people driving by. It's not that we shouldn't be doing that, but we're just usually too happy growing something, doing something.
I just think it's interesting, too, that, your ties, your history, your heritage in being a cattleman and engaged in it I think it makes an individual more passionate about the story, and makes it, because they have ties to it and a love to it and a love to the family. My priorities in life are my faith, family, and then farming. And because of that, it's my passion, and it's yours too. And it's evident, it's manifest in you. I've known you most of my life, and I've known always to be passionate about agriculture. Although you worked for the commissioner, you're always very passionate about what you had and what you had in the story to tell, because it's a part of who you are. And I think a lot of our Florida farmers and ranchers are that way, wouldn't you? I mean, you know most of them, and that's the way we are.
Yep.
I mean, we love to tell our story because. But the problem is that oftentimes we don't take time. When we do take time, it's great, but we don't take time to tell that story. But you do that.
It's hard. It's like I say, I'd rather be welcoming a new calf to the world or seeing what the crop looks like than being on the street, being in town someplace. But it's a great blessing to be able to get amongst town folks and be able to tell them our story. And like I say, they enjoy it. They're fascinated by what goes on in the fields and in the woods to produce food and fiber for them. When they sit down and think about it, unfortunately, a lot of people don't think about it. They just never have had. They've never been exposed to it. They haven't had to think, well, where does this food sold, this gallon of milk or this sweet potato come from, or this beefsteak? They think it comes from Publix or one of the grocery stores, and they haven't thought any further than that. But when things start clicking, they get proud of their farmer. Then they want to know who their farmer is. And that's the good thing for all of us. The more they understand it, the better off we are.
Well, one of the unique things that you do, and one of the things you are known for around the state, around the country at that, is telling the story through poetry, what we call cowboy poetry. You've had a lot of saddle time in your life to be able to do a little bit of that. Tell us a little bit about cowboy poetry and how you became acquainted with it and got engaged with it.
Our Creator gave humans a language, the ability to communicate at a level far deeper and far greater than any other species, and I believe that He wants us to use that in positive ways, and the spoken word is a powerful thing.
Amen.
Our history has been shared before people could write, and not too many generations ago, people learned more listening to each other around the campfire or around the table than they did reading the book, or especially if they didn't get it on Google or whatever that is, So the spoken word is a very powerful, very important part of who we are. And I think that God intended us to get together and to talk. I think that Matthew chapter 18 covers that pretty well. I enjoy storytelling, and I learned some poems. The school teachers made us learn Edgar Allan Poe poems and that kind of stuff. But I wrote some down myself that I liked probably better. And, of course, I didn't keep up with them. A lot of them I wrote on little scraps of paper and stuck them someplace, and then didn't keep up with them. But some I kept up with. And when I started working for the Department of Agriculture, promoting Florida Ag, the marketing campaign, which we know it now is Fresh from Florida, I had to go meet with ag groups, and I found out right quick that an icebreaker works pretty well in a public meeting. So I would tell them a little story or tell them a little poem or something. And after a while, they started inviting me back to come, forget that other stuff, just come tell us some stories, So I got invited to a lot of places, a lot of groups, had the pleasure of getting to be in touch with folks all around for doing cowboy poetry. And Florida got recognized in the year 2020. They have a national poetry gathering in Elko, Nevada. They had it for years, and they ignored Florida. They had the Mongolians and everybody else, but they ignored the southern United States until 2020. They said, we're going to have Florida come to Elko. And the Department of State, the Florida Cattlemen's Foundation, got together, created the Florida Ag Museum, and created a traveling museum exhibit to go to Elko to tell the story of Florida ranching history. And about a dozen of us went, when they had the gathering lasted about a week. Oh, wow. We went up there. We were able to, they have stuff going on all around the town of Elko all during the week, all kind of poets and singers and all that in several stages around town. And Doyle Connor Jr. found us a building with a stage in it. So we just had the Florida building. We were on the main stage at various times, but we had on building, we had something going on there every day for the whole time of the festival, and it put Florida's ranching culture on the national map. We'd already had the Great Florida Cattle Drive in 1995, and that made worldwide press. It was on the front page of the Tokyo Times, and Noah Jr. can tell you all the different inches of space we got on national newspapers, but it really made people start thinking, hey, our culture's pretty doggone cool, and we got something, we can be proud of it. We don't have to go backstage, just stay in the cow camp. We can get out and talk about it. It's kind of cool to be a Florida cracker.
It is. And so you got that opportunity, Elko. Tell us a little bit about the cattle drive. Mr. Dole Connor Jr. I know that was his baby as well, but tell us a little bit about that and its heritage and why it got so much press.
Dan Hightower was a gentleman that came to Dole and said, we need to do a cattle drive. Before it's just impossible to drive cattle across, before too many houses come in, before it's impossible, let's have one more cattle drive. And they brought it to the Cracker Cattle Association annual meeting in about 93. And a lot of people said, you can't do it. A lot of people said, we're going to do it. We need to do it. So we drove about 1,000 head of cattle, 70 miles across Florida. We ended in Kissimmee at the Silver Spurs Rodeo. And it made, like I said, worldwide press. It was just something awesome to do a cattle drive in Florida in 1995. We had helicopters buzzing over us, taking pictures and all that stuff. But then they started trying to do a reunion, try to do one every 10 years. And it's been a really great thing for pulling people together, for letting families share their history and their heritage. They started the Ranch Rodeo Finals and Heritage Festival soon thereafter, and that was another venue for showcasing Florida agriculture.
A lot of value there. So you've had an association, you have meetings, you have a herd that was kept to make sure the preservation was done. You've had a cattle drive, and I'm sure on that cattle drive there's a little poetry that went around the little fire there as well. And so I tell you, that heritage and that storytelling you do so well. Do you have a poem for us today?
Well, thinking about our connection with our town friends, a poem that fits well with that is, and Farm Bureau too, Mr. Herbert Nistendirk was a farmer and a Farm Bureau member that moved from Jefferson County to Leon. He bought a farm in Leon County, and he was close enough to, if you called Tallahassee a city, and FSU, he was close enough to Tallahassee that he got some spillover of college kids coming onto his place. So this story kind of celebrates how we get along with our town folk friends. The swimming hole. Herbert Nistendirk built a great swimming hole on the far side of his farm. Spring-fed, lime rock bottom, clear and cool, different in every way from a chlorine city pool. Now his kids and their friends kept this swimming hole busy for years. It was the perfect place for birthday parties, spring break, or 4th of July cheers. The kids are all grown up now and moved away, leaving that swimming hole for some later date. It's peaceful and quiet. Waiting for that date, the place seems enchanted in its semi-wild state. It's seldom visited by hardly anyone, but still old Herbert keeps the mowing done. Then one day on Herbert's hiking trip, he spied something that made him flip. The first thing that he noticed was tree limbs adorned with stuff like he'd seen in magazines from Victoria, nearly buff. When he stepped into that clearing, knowing that trespassers must be nearing, he spied them about the same time they spied him. It's hard to say who was the most surprised, but it shocked him to his boots just to find those giggling girls swimming in their birthday suits. Swimming down to the deep end, nearly up to their chins, without a stitch in sight, suddenly they were surprised and perplexed about their plight. The skinny dippers put up quite a fuss, screaming, "Go away, old man! Don't be looking at us!" Herbert said, "Don't worry, girls. I won't do you any harm. I'm Herbert Nistendirk, and I own this here farm. You don't have to get out right now. I can finish my chores later. I'm not in a hurry anyhow. I just came by to feed that big old alligator."
That's a good one. can tell you some of these are really, really special. And you can come up with a lot in the saddle, can't you?
Yeah. Well, you can't. Some of that stuff you can't make. I mean, just things like that happen. We had them come. You have visitors on the farm, for all kind of reasons, But Mr. Herbert was a great guy, and my wife said, "You need to change that. And that's too hard of a name to change. You need to change that name." I said, "It's his poem. I'm gonna leave his name in it. That's his name. I'm gonna leave him in there."
Well, it's a part of the heritage. You got to leave the name in as it is.
That's right.
All right, we've discussed a lot of background today, especially in regard to our heritage and points, and especially in regard to the cattle industry and Florida agriculture as a whole, and your part in it. A new theme for membership this year is Tied to Agriculture. It's highlighting how we are all connected to agriculture. And I'd like to hear from you and why it's important for our listeners to know the history of cracker cattle and its importance to our agricultural heritage, industry, and today's history.
Tied to Agriculture is a brilliant theme to help people from all walks of life realize that they are indeed tied to agriculture. The miracle of modern agriculture has made America the envy of the world and the benefactor to the world. Everyone relies on ag producers on a daily basis without even having a thought about what goes in to producing food and fiber and clothing that they enjoy. And when you break it down to the fact that the brake fluid in their car has an additive that comes from a beef cow, they don't think about that, But it's such a valuable, agriculture is just such a intrinsically valuable piece of what we do and who we are as Americans. But the more that folks understand agriculture, the better they can appreciate and support all that goes into keeping them fed and tended to. It's an honor and a privilege and a blessing to be associated with and make my living in supporting agriculture. In addition to my family, I cherish the families that I've been able to get to know and be a part of as we work together in agriculture. I've been blessed beyond measure to get to know these folks all over agriculture. And like I said a while ago, when you find the agriculture folks, you find the finest on the earth. I'm so grateful for the role the Farm Bureau plays as the voice of agriculture. Farm Bureau is trusted by the public and by our policymakers as a source of information and knowledge when it comes to agriculture. We're so fortunate to have a Farm Bureau that the legislature can run to and ask questions. We're thinking about doing this. How can we make it better? How can we be sure we don't do damage to the people that feed us? That is a great service, but it helps everybody across what do we have now, 20 million people, but it helps everybody when we support ag and have a strong agriculture. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, I know this, being tied to ag's what's tied you and I together, and that's
right.
been a blessing for many years, and it's been a blessing to have you today. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to today's broadcast?
Jeb, I would like to finish up with closing like I've closed a lot of cowboy poetry events with a story that's not a poem. Jerry Clower was one of my heroes. He was a comedian, Christian comedian, and fertilizer salesman rolled into one. And a lot of people looked up to Jerry Clower, and me too. But my favorite Jerry Clower story is where he was interviewing his boss man that started him on the road, put him on the road selling fertilizer, Owen Cooper. They'd heard a radio broadcast where a gentleman was interviewed, and if he had his life to live over again, he was asked that, and he said, bigger boats and fancy shoes and bigger cars and finer home and all this me stuff, but nothing about others. So they discussed that a while. They were driving in the vehicle, and Jerry said, "Mr. Cooper, let me ask you that same question. If you had your life to live over, what would you do?" And Owen Cooper said, "If I had my life to live over, I would love more. I would especially love others more. I would let love express itself in a concern for my neighbors, my friends, and all with whom I came in contact. I would let love permeate me, overcome me, and direct me. I would love the unlovely, the unwanted, and the unknown. If I had my life to live over, I would give more. I would learn early in life the joy of giving, the pleasure of sharing, the happiness of helping. I would give more than money. I would give of life's most treasured possessions, time, thoughts, and kind words. If I had my life to live over, I would be much more unconventional, Where custom acknowledges peers at best with whom to have fellowship, I would want some non-peer friends. Where tradition stratifies people because of economics, education, race, or religion, I would want to fellowship with friends in all strata. Where society overlooks people, I would socialize with them. I would choose to go where the road is not paved, where the crowd doesn't go, where the weather is bitter, where the needs are great, where friends are few, and where God is most likely to be found. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that bit of wisdom. Well, thank you for what you mean to us, and thank you for being a part of Farm Bureau, but a part of our history, our heritage. We love you, and I appreciate you. Thank you for being my friend. There you have it, Mr. Stephen Monroe. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, President Smith.